Well, welcome everybody to the CSJ's The Lost Children of Lockdown panel. Such an important issue this that's only recently been covered in the Times, who reported that there are now suspected to be 135,000 pupils who have disappeared from school. So just to give some very brief context to this, because as you can see, we've got an illustrious panel. I'm not going to speak because we want to hear from them. But just to give you some of the background of this. So the pandemic has caused a load of school children to just disappear from the school roll. We don't know how many precisely, but obviously those estimates from 95,000 to 135,000 are extremely worrying. In England, any parent can declare their child to be home educated without needing to inform the school or local authority about that decision. Once a child is off roll, there are no mandatory inspections, no requirements to follow the national curriculum, and often no access to resources to support their education. With this cohort growing at an alarming rate, the Education Select Committee this year published a report examining elective home education. Their inquiry sought to find the balance between the right of families to make the best choices for their children and the ability to ensure that all children in elective home education are getting access to a suitable education. Their primary concerns focused on the children who are missing education, the children whose family has not freely decided to move their child into home education and had instead been coerced. What this event is going to do is debate the benefits and risks of elective home education, and what I'll ask is what can be done better to protect vulnerable children from being coercively removed from school. So without further ado, we're absolutely delighted to be joined here by the Minister for Children and Families, Will Quince. Now, we appreciate, Will, you're only recently into the job, but I think this is an issue that we can all identify with without having done too much research into the issues. We've also got Robert Halfon here, who's the chair of the Education Select Committee that has done the investigation that I've just referred to. On my right here is Shaun Bailey, needs no introduction. He's the London mayoral candidate for the Conservatives and a member of the London Assembly. Colin Goffin is the principal at Big Lecture Learning UK, and Alice Wilcock over at the end is head of education at the CSJ. We've got a great panel. We're going to go through and just have about 5 minutes from everybody, starting with Will, and then I'll bring you in, and then we're going to open it up, because I think this is the kind of issue that actually we want to get a lot of interaction, and I'd like your questions to these great panellists and an opportunity to really, really discuss what is at the heart of these very serious issues. Will, can you take it away, please?
Camilla, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be. I've been a minister at the Department for Work and Pensions for the past 2.5 years, and now 2.5 weeks into the role as Minister for Children and Families, which I'm delighted, because it's a fantastic department and it's an area I'm massively passionate about. And when you arrive at a department, the first thing you say to your private office is, give me all of the big issues, especially the polarising issues, on the table, and let me have a look at what we need to get stuck into and prioritise. And this was, of course, one of the top issues. And when you have an issue that is polarising, like elective home education, the first question you ask is, right, so show me the data. Where are we at? And our Secretary of State, Nadeem, won't surprise you to know that he's very much data-driven. He wants to take an evidence-based approach. So he has told us, go away and look at the data, and let's take an evidence approach to what we do. And unfortunately, in this area, there is very poor data, and I'll come back on to that in a moment. I think the first thing to stress is that we very much support the right of parents to educate their children at home, and most parents do a fantastic job. But I think the worry that I have is that there are some that won't, and they're the ones that concern me. Our data is very poor, and that is why we've committed to have a registration system. That is going to require primary legislation. It's not something we can do quickly, but there is a lot of work we can do far swifter to get better data, and we're working to do that for September of next year. If I can accelerate that, of course I will. So we believe, according to ACDS and the analysis that they've done, there are around 75,000 children, in fact, off-roll. And I think what concerns me, as much as the figure, which in the context is relatively small compared to the population within schools, is the rise. And we need to know why. So it's not just about knowing numbers, it's about knowing why parents are choosing to home educate. Actually, there are some very good reasons why parents will choose to do that. In most cases, it's for absolutely the right reason. They have an excellent education. But if there are other reasons, for example, we believe, a 38 or 40% increase over the course of the pandemic. We hear anecdotally, a lot of that will be for health reasons. We would therefore expect to see a reversion. So we've got to keep a very close eye on that. But if we don't have the data to back that up, that's problematic because we can't take an evidence-based approach. So we've got the Select Committee's report, which I think has been very helpful and is now with the department. So I suppose, in conclusion, what I would say, Camilla, is that this is a hot topic for me. It's a polarising issue because we're always going to have local authorities that want to have more control and safeguards in place, and there is an understandable case there. And at the same time, parents want that autonomy. They don't want the state interfering in what they believe is their right to educate their children at home. And we've got to get the balance right, and the approach that I plan to take with the support of the Secretary of State is taking a data evidence-based approach, putting the children and pupils and the outcomes of those children and young people at the heart of our approach.
Thank you, Will. Robert.
Thank you, and it's good to be at the CSJ, probably my most favourite think tank, and they do an incredibly important work. I regarded the school closures during lockdown as nothing short of a national disaster for our children, and I described it as the four horsemen of the education apocalypse galloping towards our young people in terms of lost educational attainment, mental health disorders, the loss of potential earnings, life chances, and of course safeguarding hazards, because we know that children have joined county line gangs, have suffered from domestic abuse, have been subject to online predatory behaviour. And one of the outcomes of that has been that, as the Centre for Social Justice has pointed out, that 93,500 children missed over 50% of their school sessions last autumn. The former Children's Commissioner, as was described in the Sunday Times and Camilla alluded to, suggests it's between 93 and 135,000. I describe these children as the ghost children. As disturbing as this is, at least we know about these children, and the schools know who they are. And I do think that there has to be a major effort from the government, from the Department for Education, working with local authorities and schools and academies to track these children and invest everything possible in getting these children back to school. But whilst we know about these children, we don't know about home-educated children, as has been pointed out by Will, and I can't be more happy that somebody, compassionate conservative like Will, has been made Children's Minister. But we have no data, no analysis of these pupils' outcomes, of all these pupils who are being home educated. And 38% increase, possibly, 75,000 children being educated at home. And I think this is a problem. I absolutely believe in the autonomy of parents to home educate their children. I get it. It's interesting to note that we are the most liberal country apart from the Netherlands. Most other countries frown on it or ban it completely. And we've done a lot of work on this in our Education Select Committee that I chair, and published a report just before the summer break. And what we argue is that there should be proper data. The Department for Education suggests that these children are not being educated as well as they might be, or the most of them may not be being educated. That's why the register is so important. I know the government are committed to it, but I would urge Will to make it a priority, because we've talked about a register. It's not just me, it's Ofsted, it's the former Children's Commissioner, the current Children's Commissioner, many people. The only way of finding out properly about these home-educated children is by having a register. Now, the second proposal, which I think is some people regard it as controversial, I don't understand why, because is to have some kind of assessment, at least an annual assessment of children who are being home educated in at least basic numeracy and literacy. The former Children's Commissioner suggested that they should be assessed once a term. We're suggesting once a year. Now, this is regarded with horror in some quarters, but we assess children all the time at school with key stages, with various key stages there are, with qualifications. And yet when you suggest, God forbid, that children who are being home educated should be assessed once a year for basic maths and English, it's somehow seen as controversial. And this is not to denigrate those wonderful families who are bringing up their children home educated in a very good way. But we know that is not the case across the board, confirmed by the Department for Education. But also we need to help those parents, because there are too many parents who've been forced into home education, especially true of families with special educational needs. Now, we did a big report into special educational needs, one of the biggest ever inquiries by any select committee in the history of Parliament. The government have said they've got a review. I know that will be on top of it, but they've got to publish some recommendations, whether it's based on our report or their own review. They've got to come out with some solutions, because we know that parents who have children with special educational needs wade through, and any MP knows this through our surgeries, wades through this unkind treacle of bureaucracy. There's a postcode lottery prohibition. There aren't enough trained staff, and unless they know how to lobby their MPs, they often don't get the right care for their child. And we are not, we don't allow these children to have a level playing field, and I think that's entirely wrong. We do think also, given that we're saying that there should be some kind of assessment of children who are home educated, there should at least be a level playing field for exams, and we urge the government to fund home educated pupils who wish to complete GCSEs. It seems an incentive, at least, for all these children to do these qualifications if they get some help, financial support from the government. I just want to briefly conclude by talking about the vexed subject of off-rolling. Now, I'm not against exclusions from school. And of course, if kids bring knives or drugs, or absolutely the head has a responsibility to the rest of pupils. But 40 children a day are excluded from our school. And the problem is, it isn't just about formal exclusions, there's informal exclusions known as off-rolling. Now, here's a statistic for you. 5% of schools are responsible for 40% of children being withdrawn to home education in 2017 to 2018. I find that disturbing, and what I think should happen is that there should be a requirement for schools to publish data on their websites about the number of permanent and fixed-term exclusions alongside the number of children taken off the school roll. And as I said, just to conclude, we know there are examples where home education has been successful, but some families are struggling, and no one seems to care about those families who are struggling, where the children may not be getting the home education that they need. And it does not follow that every home educated family has access to the network and resources they need to provide a suitable education, which is the duty of every parent according to the law, to provide a suitable education and ensure their child can have some kind of independence in life. And as I say, neither is it wrong to suggest that home educated children need to have a basic knowledge of literacy and numeracy. And I think by having that register, we can ensure that assistance and resources can be directed to home educated families who are having difficulties. We can't sweep this under the carpet for much longer. I think this is a priority, especially given, as I described in my opening remarks to you, given what's happened during the pandemic. We've got to stop these four horsemen of the apocalypse and make sure that we get our children educated again and give them, every child, whatever their background, that chance to climb on the education ladder of opportunity.
Thanks so much, Robert. Shaun Bailey, please.
Afternoon all, thank you. Excuse my nasally voice. I have the lurgies. One of you gave it to me. Look, I come at this from a purely social point of view. I think we have the right to ask for changes in the law, to ask parents who are going to home educate to at least notify. And local authority stands absolutely no chance of helping that child if they're unaware. So I don't know what's going into the bill, but we legally have the right to ask, morally have the right to ask to be notified, because of course we as a society will have to pick up whatever goes wrong in that situation. So mental health, physical health, criminality, whatever, we will be covering that bill. So therefore we have the right to be able to be given the knowledge so we can intervene earlier on to lower all the poor social outcomes as well. I also think if someone's going to home educate, they should have to demonstrate they have some capacity to do so. Because I think that'll do two things. It'll help local authorities, whoever the authority is, catch some of the charlatans in the case, and it also helps some decent parents think again. My wife is a teacher, and she happily thought she could home educate until the pandemic came along and thought, crikey, school is a very, very good place. And there's lots of people who genuinely think they can do it, and when it comes to it, it turns out to be an awful hill to climb. So I think we have the right to ask those two questions, and if we don't, I take exception with that. The other piece as well is data versus enforcement, in my mind. We are, as a nation, we are very busy infantilizing entire communities. Parents, we started that process years ago, and now we're doing entire communities. We will get data, it'll make all of us professionals feel nice, we'll tell ourselves what the problem is, we'll give it nice fancy names and acronyms, but we won't actually do anything. If I had the money, I'd spend it on enforcement. So in my world, you've had to notify me that you're going to keep your child at home. You've had to demonstrate that you could educate that child, and if you can't, I'm coming to look for you. Because ultimately, we have a legal, a moral obligation to educate those children. If you were in care, the government would make sure that you were educated. So why is it any different if you're not in care? So I think we need to slightly remove the kid gloves. I don't believe by removing the gloves we will do anything to remove the right to home educate. Many children who are home educated far outperform children who are in our education system, but it's not true for everyone. And of course, it covers a myriad of social ills, abuse, exploitation, all manner of things. And of course, the latest criminal phenomena is county lines. How many of those children have disappeared from school into county lines gangs? I mean, I bet you a fair amount of parents think they are at school. We do really need to give local authorities the teeth to deal with this. I think the last thing I'll say as well, any conversation we have should talk about what we're doing for parents. I've been a youth worker for over 25 years, and the middle classes of this country have built a massive industry of operating the poorer communities' lives, and you do it badly, very, very badly. Someone said to me, what are we doing to help poor people? And they reeled off all of these things, social services, Give them the money. Give them the money. My mum didn't need your help, she needed the money. Yeah, if you give these communities their own income, some support, they'll do far better than the service has ever done. There's many services in this country that, quite frankly, are a complete waste of money. And if I was to run the universe, some of that would be tipped into this, because the biggest thing about fighting poverty is education, because it leads to a job, a home, because it leads to security. And if we are going to let our children disappear off the road in such huge numbers and not do something about enforcing it, we are kidding ourselves. What we're doing is building another industry for the middle classes to work in, wring our hands and tell us how wonderful we are, but not actually help the young people who need the help. Give the authorities the teeth to do something about this. And if there's criminality involved, if there's stubborn parents involved, deal with them. Their rights as a parent don't override the rights of that child's future.
Thanks, Shaun. Colin.
Thank you. Thanks. It's really delighted to be here, actually. Because it's an illustrious panel. I thought it was out of place, Camilla, to be honest.
Not at all.
I think the really key point for me, I work in what's called alternative provision, and I hate the word alternative provision because it should be inclusive provision. We are part of the provision of education. Alternative is seen as something that is different and it doesn't belong. It's where you go when you don't fit, as opposed to being part of a whole approach looking after young people. And that, for me, is a wrong way to approach. We're full of misnomers. Elective is a misnomer in a large number of these cases. Robert's alluded to SEND children, but it's also the same with various families for various different reasons. And I think something that the report identified, and Will has referred to as well this afternoon, is that this isn't a homogenous group. There's a huge amount of variety with elective home education, and we need to be much more sophisticated and aware of the reasons, where it's come from and how it works. I think that we have to differentiate between families that have not found school as somewhere they want to be part of, and education as something they don't want to involve the families and the children in. We've worked with families. One girl actually taught herself a number of languages because we're in Doncaster. Doncaster. I get told off for that every day. Doncaster. And the community there has got a various number of ethnic groups and languages and cultures within it. So she taught herself the languages so she could open a beauty parlour. She didn't go to school. She was electively home educated, but she opened a parlour so she could do that. And she taught herself all of those languages. So these aren't families as a whole that are saying we don't want education. What they're saying is that school in some way is not working for us at the moment and what's being offered. I think that, we've talked, again, that the title of this session is about lockdown, and we talked about the numbers have increased during lockdown. I don't think we can ignore the fact this was an issue before lockdown. Every year you're talking 50, 60,000 children that are home educated before we got the great rise during lockdown. What's interesting about lockdown, I don't for a second negate the issues that Robert's raised and others have talked about in terms of lost learning. I don't know about lost learning, that's a slightly different way in terms of what we're learning, we're aiming for, but definitely in terms of safeguarding, in terms of mental health, they're massive issues. But actually, during lockdown, and I won't tell you where this has come from, you can ask me after, I don't want to get strung up before I leave the building. This is a comment on children, a global report on children. I got more time at home, so I got close to my family. I learnt many things, such as playing piano, Photoshop, improved my skills at making logos, improved my English. Now I'm getting ready to announce my own business I was working on during lockdown. One student from Indonesia said, it made me more productive at home, made me discover new hobbies and ways of thinking. What was striking is that young people from all different contexts reported using their free time to pursue creative and innovative ideas, which ironically did not have the time to do alongside their normal education in school. We work very much, and we're the first place in the UK to do this. It's been going in America, Australia, all over the globe for years. We work on very much kind of independent, project-based learning based on student interests. And actually what we found during the lockdown was because we geared the learners up to work in that way, they actually engaged just as much, if not in some cases more, because they weren't hyper-stimulated by the learners around them in the classroom, than they did during some of the lessons we had before lockdown happened. And I think one of the things that we can perhaps look at in terms of lessons from the lockdown, and I understand why we did this as schools, we're very quick to run back to what had happened before, as opposed to taking some learning for what we could get from what we could do differently during. And we just went back to, we need to get back as soon as we can, get them in lessons. Now, there's a reason why your lesson being replicated over a Teams or a Zoom doesn't work, because that's not what it's designed for, because you can't do the interaction, you can't do it in that way. So that's why I think some of that learning was lost. Schools had no time to prepare for it, absolutely no time. They weren't ready for it. But I think we can learn there are different ways to do things. I think what's really interesting for me as well is about the idea about the reasons behind home education, and we've talked a little bit about some of the off-rolling stuff that goes on. I think I would absolutely echo the fact that there needs to be more information given to families about what that means. Before I did this, I spent 20 years in regular mainstream education. I'd have families coming to me talking about elective home education, and I'd pull up what they needed to do every single time they walked through the door and said, this is what you are saying you are going to provide for your child. Can you do that? And they'd go, oh, hang on, don't know about that. That doesn't happen in a majority of schools. I've had children come to me in secondary school who in year 3 or 4 were told they were signing up to take a computer home and didn't actually have an education there for 2.5 years. Who then came to secondary school and did what a year 3, year 4 child would do, spent the day running around the corridors, and we had a year getting them back online to get them actually to the point where they were ready, just mature enough to be able to cope with secondary school. So there are, and I think these have been cracked down on. I know that definitely Robert's committee, when he was interviewing the new Children's Commissioner, who used to be my boss, gave her an absolute grilling over what happened, particularly in some of the schools, things like that around. So things are being done to change this. But there's still room for, I know this was mentioned in the report as well, there's still room for the local authority to have more of a conversation with schools and families around doing this. And, a family is kind of in the position where you're close to permanent exclusion. Do you know what permanent exclusion will do for you? These are the options open to you. And the family says, I do not want my child to have permanent exclusion on their record, because permanent exclusion leads to gangs, leads to prison, leads to whatever. I don't want my child to have that. So I'll take elective home ed because it seems to me to be the way to go. And they don't really understand what it is they have to do. The trouble with that is obviously it then puts them in a position where they are then responsible for that. And, we talk about the recognition of their right to do it. We talk about the legal responsibility for them to do it. I'm really pleased to hear Robert talking about actually we need to do more in terms of funding to support these families. I think, there's more to it than paying exam fees. I think we need to do a lot more to support these families. I think the fact that as soon as they come off a roll, they leave the census, and that money doesn't get anywhere near any kind of local authority at all, what it would do in terms of pupil unit funding if they're in normal education. And what it means is actually we then fall into things like, let's do monitoring, let's do assessment, let's do school assessment, school attendance orders. And sadly, because there isn't the report mentions training for local authorities, and that's really powerful. There isn't the experience maybe in some of the education welfare officers. Some of them are really good, but some of them, that's not what they're there to do. They don't have an understanding of what a secondary education should look like. So it's very hard for them to go and assess whether this is appropriate or not. And that is with the families they know about. So I think we need to think more about how we can do creative things around that. I've heard 2 sessions today, both talking about funding upstream and about the fact that when we're talking about addiction and dependency on substances, when we talk about homelessness in this room earlier on, we need to get upstream and the intervention. In Doncaster, 27% of the children that end up as NEET in Doncaster, not in education, employment or training, are electively home educated till they get to that point. That is going to cost a huge amount. You're talking 50 to 100,000 a year in terms of someone who ends up as NEET. We did a very quick back of a cigarette packet calculation, and we worked out if we worked on a pilot of 48 children between years 10 and 11 in school who are currently home educated and not attending anything. If we got 12 of the 48 into education in some format post-16, we would actually draw back the money we would need to do the entire 48. And that's only if we get a quarter. I think we could do more than a quarter. I've got quite confidence in what we can do. But you know, there's this real issue in terms of what are we doing. And this is the same thing. The last time I was in a room with Robert, actually, was at an alternative provision conference where the difference was speaking, and Kieran Gill was talking about the amount of money exclusions cost in terms of long term to the economy every single year. You know, and we're way before that. Let's get in much earlier with our intervention. I think that the real thing for me that comes out of this as well, though, is this isn't just about what do we do in terms of elective home education. I think there are models and there are approaches we can use. I'm working with a school locally at the moment to see if we can put electively home educated children onto a guest role. If they're on a guest role, we can then find some way to access funding from the local authority through designated schools funds, a high needs tariff. So we can actually get them some form of education, get them into something post-16 so they've got a meaningful future, or at some point get them back into education. But I think, you know, again, there's this tendency to look at this as a homogenous group who are trying to hide away, trying to pull their children out because they don't want them found out, they don't want to get caught up on. The majority of the families that we work with, and we work with quite a few elective home educated children because the rise you're talking about in terms of EHE is the same in Doncaster as anywhere else. The majority of them want their children in a school. They are not looking to get their children away from school. What they're finding at the moment is that the school system and a lot of the school accountability measures are almost pushing schools to the point where, and you get this when you talk to educators as well, is that actually they don't feel they have the time or they don't feel they have the scope to invest in the kind of relational work and the kind of early personal social development with children when they first join them that would mean actually they could be part of the school system and not need to get to the point where they were pushing towards off-rolling or to getting to the point of exclusion or the families removing them. And there's something I think about the wider picture in terms of education that we need to consider as well, in that our drive for accountability measures in terms of examination success and academic success is actually in teachers, and it's teachers, heads of department, school leaders, you know, leaders of academy trusts to be so anxious about what their figures look at the end of the year that they're not able to take a step back and say, let's look after these as people, then we can think about the education and then we'll get there. I was really fortunate, and we always talk about this comparison between independent and state school systems. I was on a scholarship and independent school. I spent 10 years being told you don't belong here because my accent was really broad Norfolk. I've spent 25 years since then being said you're too posh to be in the state system, so I can't win anyway. But the one thing I got there was we were regarded as people first. And yet when we talk about the state system, we lose the sight of the people, even though our point of comparison is always, wouldn't it be great if the state was more like the independent system? And, you know, Michael Young, writing in The Impact, which is the Chartered Colleges magazine, actually said if we want to try and replicate the curriculum model of the independent system, but we don't put the funding and resourcing and understanding into the state system that exists in the independent, we'll end up with draconian authoritarian measures. And our behaviour systems in our school are leading to that kind of way, which is why we're having these families pushed out. So yes, we need to do a lot more in terms of our support in the elective home education, but equally we need to stop people jumping off the cliff as well as rearranging ambulances at the bottom.
Thanks so much, Colin. And last but not least, the CSJ's very own Alice, please.
Thank you very much, Camilla. My name's Alice, and I'm Head of Education at the Centre for Social Justice, and it's great to be here to talk about elective home education. Over the last year, as we've heard, the numbers of pupils in elective home education has skyrocketed. An additional 20,000 pupils have disappeared from their school roll. And yeah, as we heard earlier, experts are estimating that's around 75,000 pupils in total in elective home education. We were saying this is quite small, but that actually equates to 0.7% of the school population. And it's quite interesting, this rise in pupil cases, because what we're hearing is that the cases are becoming more complex. I think about 14% of all pupils, according to the survey ADCS commissioned, are known to children's social care. we don't know why they're being moved off. I think we had a discussion about this, about the reasons of moves into elective home education. Quite frankly, there's very little data in this space. In fact, 9 in 10 local authorities don't even think they know every single child in elective home education in their local area. So let alone do we know the reasons, we don't even know every single child that is in elective home education. It's always been relatively easy in England for people to move into elective home education. Parents just need to declare that they're taking their child off roll, and that's it. And unfortunately, because it's so easy to move into elective home education, we've seen cases where the ease of leaving the school system has been abused. Young people have been off-rolled into elective home education. Now, I often have a question about how frequent does this happen? You know, is this a myth? Is it just a couple of kids? 1 in 5 local authorities have seen pro forma letters that schools have set up for parents who have no understanding of literacy, that they can't read the letters they're being asked to sign to take their children off-roll. So that's a massive number of kids being moved off roll. Quite frankly, we've no idea how many kids are in elective home education because they've made the choice to for philosophical reasons, and how many kids have been off-rolled. And so, yeah, it's great to know that you're looking to start at the data there, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of clarity on what's happening to these children, or what child has been off-rolled and which child is there because they've decided this is the best choice for them. So there are, of course, many families who are doing a brilliant job and for whom home educating is an informed choice and often made in the best interest of their child. I'm sure every parent in this room who's had to home educate, and I'll make a distinction here, homeschool their children this year, knows how difficult it is. Home educating is even harder because there's no resources available. And so I do commend those who've made that decision in the best interest of their children. But often missing from this debate is the voice of pupils whose parents didn't make the choice to move off-roll quite so freely. The voice of children who've been coercively removed from school. So we do need to get the balance right between protecting parents' right to make the best choices for their children and making sure that every child receives a suitable education. So there's a lot that we could probably talk about, and I think there's been a wide range of discussion, but I'm going to focus on 2 recommendations in this speech that actually speak to Shaun's point about how we best support parents and pupils, because I think that's often missing from this debate too. What are we not putting into the system to support pupils to get the best education they can? These are ensuring that every young person has the right to sit English and Maths GCSEs, and offering families a right to return. These policy changes would help to ensure that every child and family that moves into elective home education is given the support that they need to provide the best possible education for their child. So first and foremost, we need to enshrine every young person's right to sit English and Maths GCSEs. It's essential that we equip every young learner with the basic skills they need to compete in the jobs market, whether these learners are in school or home educated. There's a wealth of evidence suggests that you need your Maths and English GCSEs to compete in the jobs market today. DFE commissioned research has shown that your marginal lifetime earnings, I think, go up by £100,000 if you have Maths and English. And Impetus, we actually had an event with them earlier on, and they showed that if you got your Maths and English GCSEs, but you might not get 5 GCSEs in total, your lifetime earnings was substantially higher compared to the control group. So Maths and English is fundamentally really important, and to me, it's not defensible that we're not equipping these learners to sit their Maths and English because we're not giving them fair access to the jobs market. At present, there's some massive hurdles that families have to jump when they're trying to provide a suitable education for their children at home. So when a child is taken off the school's register, it becomes a parent's duty to finance these examinations. So as a consequence, we don't know how many children in elective home education are entered for GCSEs, their pass rates, or the overall cost to parents. We've heard from families who weren't aware of this prior to taking their children off roll. I think it's worth saying that over the pandemic, that's been made a lot worse. In fact, I've spoken to families who said, I thought Joe Wicks was going to be continuing over the course of the next year. You know, I thought I was going to have Oak Academy at my fingertips. Home education, homeschooling is really different, and it was great to see that the Minister over the pandemic urged caution and made the distinction between the two. But unfortunately, parents did not realise when they took their children off roll, largely because of health reasons, that would be different to homeschooling. So there's been a massive information gulf. We've heard from these families and that don't have funds for textbooks or don't have funds to sit their children for exams. And even when they do have the funds, they're fighting to try and get them to sit as a private candidate for their GCSEs. In fact, local authorities, even before the pandemic, were saying this was a massive problem because it's becoming more difficult to find exam centres for these privately entered students. And this should be even more concerning because the rise in electively home-educated pupils is being motivated by an increase in Key Stage 4 pupils. So we have to make sure that every single pupil faces a level playing field and are given the opportunity to obtain these vital qualifications. So the CSJ therefore recommends that if a child is removed from school in Key Stage 4, the money that was allocated to their exams in the school budget should be made available to finance their GCSEs. But we've been talking about off-rolling here, and we've been talking about parents who actually decide this isn't for them at the end of it, but might not have the ability to get back. We need to give pupils the ability to get back to mainstream in the cases where they decide that home education isn't for them. At present, once you come off the school roll, you might well think, oh, I can return to my mainstream school as soon as I want to, but that's not the case. You have to go through an appeals process. Often you get put through fair access protocols. I've been speaking to a range of alternative providers that are saying we're full. And they're not full with children who are excluded. I should note alternative providers are traditionally schools for excluded pupils. They're not full with children who are excluded from school. They're getting full with children who are electively home educated, who came off roll in the pandemic, haven't been able to go back to their original school, and now they've been placed in an alternative provider through the fair access protocol, and they have no ability to get back to the classrooms. I think it's brilliant that we've had teachers and politicians say, let's focus on lost learning and get children back to the classroom, and I echo that. I completely echo it. But we can't forget the children who can't get back to the classroom because they've been taken off their school roll and they don't have a right to return. In fact, this was something that was mentioned in the Timpson review. I think it's always been urgent, but it's never been more pressing than post-pandemic to give pupils a route back to the classrooms that they left. Giving pupils a right to return would also minimise the disruption caused to a child's education, because that period where you're trying to get that appeal through is incredibly disruptive. But it could also temper this coercive practice where children are being off-rolled from school. A right to return, if a school knew that you were coming back to the school roll, it would incentivise them to do everything that they could to give you the best possible education before you leave. This may well mean that many people continue to home educate, and in many circumstances this can be the right choice. But we have to also speak up for the parents who have no voice and who haven't had the information and resources at hand to provide a suitable education. We therefore must make sure that we're giving all families the information and resources they need to make the best possible choices for their children. This has always been vital, but this year, when we've seen 20,000 pupils vanish from our school roll, I think it's incredibly important, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that follows.
So am I. I mean, we couldn't have a better panel, could we? Because everybody on this panel is so close to this, and you know, that's why I want to invite you to now come in and bring your questions. I'll just ask a couple of clarifying points, please, if I can. Will, so when it comes to this data, clearly data is a massive issue. There's an absence of data. You know, we're referring to the 75,000 that we know about. When Anne Longfield talks about up to 135,000, are we saying that the 75,000 are the ones that we know are in this elective home education, and that the other thousands are just not known about at all, like they've just literally disappeared?
So the 75,000 is an estimate from the ACDS survey. So the honest answer is we don't really know, and that is a problem. And
how are you going to get this data?
So I mean, Alice is absolutely right that data is without question our biggest problem, and also off-rolling, which we know is an issue. It's an unacceptable practice. It shouldn't be happening, but we know it is, and we're working very closely with Ofsted to both define and look at how we can tackle it. And I think, Alice, as brilliant as your contribution was, it was thoroughly depressing. And you know, it is, because when I sat with those issues on my desk, looking at which ones I prioritise, you look at what are the biggest, most pressing issues, and these are affecting children. And I'm used to our. I've had 2.5 years with our benefit system. It is complex. There are problems that come up regularly, but because we have really good, robust data, I was able to identify the areas that we needed to prioritise and focus on and fix. You know, one example, and I'll just pick up on something Shaun said when he said, you know, data and a register, it's all well and good, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a change in outcomes. In and of itself, you're absolutely right. But when I look at, you know, for example, universal credit, when I looked after that for 2.5 years, I identified early on that we didn't have it. And I was asked about, okay, what are the outcomes for care leavers, for prison leavers, for survivors of domestic abuse, for veterans? And they said, well, we don't actually know because we don't record it. So that's all changed now. So we're starting to record all of that because data is really powerful. Because if you have the data, you know, for example, we know then we will be able to identify what are the drivers of elective home education. We'll be able to start tracking the progress of those children. We'll be able to start flagging issues. We'll be able to identify far easier issues around safeguarding. And ultimately, we'll be able to improve and drive improved outcomes through policy. One of the biggest challenges, it was certainly a challenge at DWP, I've no doubt it'll be a challenge at DFE, it was of course Her Majesty's Treasury, and it's very, very difficult to extract money from the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chief Secretary of the Treasury if you don't have demonstrable outcomes. And you can't have demonstrable outcomes without good quality data. So if we really want to see change in this space, the register is really important. Changes, the data collection is really important. We're going to have a huge piece of work with local authorities. The ACDS data is helpful, but working with local authorities to collect that data is going to be key. We're seeing what we can do early part of next year, towards September next year, to try and extract as much data as we possibly can. But I fear the answer is going to be a register, so locally collected data of our registration. And we do have to have primary legislation to achieve that, which means it's not going to happen as quickly as I would like it to. But rest assured, it is an absolute priority, because all of the concerns, in particular, Alice, you rightly flag, are major concerns for me.
So just Camilla,
Yes.
just to be clear, the 90,000 to 130,000, that is separate from the 75,000
Yes.
being home educated.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
The 90 plus thousand are children who, for the most part, have not returned to school, the ghost children.
Yes,
But the
so-
school knows about them.
Yes.
The 75,000 is a rough estimate, the 38 increase, a rough estimate of children being home educated. But
Yes.
it's nothing to do with those children who
I
are
know.
not.
I was literally
all.
just checking it was
Yeah.
worse than I feared,
Yeah.
and you've confirmed
Yeah.
it is.
We fear it is.
Indeed. Another very quick question for you, Robert. Is it possible then for head teachers to pressure parents to move their children off role? You mentioned about special educational needs. These are head teachers basically saying, I don't think school's for you.
Well, I mean, this goes on all the time, and Will's just talked about it, and everybody, Ofsted keeps saying, well, they're going to do something about it, and it seems to still go on. And what we suggest in our report is actually there should, and you were talking about parental earlier, we were talking at the end about Colin, and what I think there should be is a bill of rights for parents, so that when children are excluded informally or formally, that they are clear stipulations as to what is going on, what is happening, what rights they have, whether they can appeal, because half of the time the parents don't even know that they can appeal. And it's a way that some schools use off-rolling, because it's a way that they can try and get better results, sadly,
exactly.
because of
kind
all the...
clean up their lead cables. Very quickly to Colin, Alice there is mentioning this quite staggering suggestion that a lot of the parents who are forced to sign these letters can't read them. Is that your experience, Colin?
I mean, I've not worked in the kind of communities where there's been obviously the issue in terms of English language, but definitely in terms of understanding what the responsibilities are they're taking. Definitely the case. You know, there's quite. It's interesting. Shaun mentioned parents. Shaun highlighted it, and Alice did as well. That actually. The parental anxiety around education is quite high in a lot of these cases. The parental anxiety around any kind of service, anything at all, that they feel they get found out about, they'll be into trouble and things with it. One of the greatest things about my team at the moment is my team are all from the community and all speak the language of the community and respect the community. We actually have greater success with our parents getting them to involve in agencies than almost most of the schools do around the borough, because actually we're just seen as being a friend as opposed to anything that's judgmental. And I think sometimes when parents going into schools, they're quite often the ones whose experience at school wasn't the best for themselves.
Yes.
So actually they will do what they're told to do, and they will do what they're afraid of, and they'll just take that direction. So it's not always as kind of straightforward as they can't read it, but also it's kind of, have you thought about this? This might be the best thing for you, or else this might happen.
And Shaun, because you spoke about enforcement, there have been documented incidents of children who have been sent to illegal schools once they've come off-roll. How on earth do we stop that happening?
I think before I answer that, to my mind, we're talking about two different sets of people here. If you're talking about lovely people who have some capacity in their community to educate their children, that's an entirely different conversation to the 90,000 children who have disappeared. And I would argue, hazard a guess, that the vast majority of those children who've disappeared for the wrong reason. There'll be all kinds of things of family breakdown, the parents are just not interested, can't cope, drug addiction, whatever it is. That is a very different set of people to the kind of parents you're providing information to so that they can then homeschool. The two groups of people are so far apart that a chasm does not describe that. When you talk about enforcement, I mean in the broadest sense. So, of course you need the data, but what I don't want us to do is that very professional thing where we get the data, we comfort ourselves that we understand the problem. If you're going to help out a poor community that's struggling, where kids have disappeared, and oftentimes that community think it's the right thing to do, you need to have teeth. And part of the teeth is explaining exactly what they're doing. It is my belief that 99.9% of parents want to do the right thing for their children. So if the relationship is there, and you can say you do realise by not sending your child to school A, B and C is going to happen, parents will reverse that course. But for some parents, you're going to have to step in. And I think it's our moral duty to do so, because you expose that child to a horrendous set of life outcomes that none of us would want to see. So that's why things like, if we talk about the first group of people, those group of people who want to leave and could have the capacity to educate that child, the right to return to school, I'm astonished it doesn't exist. That, to me, is somewhere between foolish and wicked. Yeah, if you get it wrong, whoops, this is a bit tougher than I imagined, straight back into school. I don't know why that doesn't exist. And that, to me, should be easy to solve. Because as a society, we decided to pay for that child. We got a discount when they left. We have to continue the payment. Let's get on with it. I don't know why we have to have a conversation about that. I feel the same about the exams. If you took your child off the roll, right, and we want your child to do well, we use exams as a marker, we should actually say, whatever happens, we expect your child to attend our exams. Now, I get for many parents that might slightly defeat the whole idea of homeschooling. I don't care. I really don't care. And I'll tell any of those parents, I'm glad that you think your child can cope with none of these formal examinations, and you may well be right, but we are talking about a broad brush. We are talking in generalizations. Policy is not about particular cases, and we have a media that drive us to focus on particular cases. As my granddad would always say, what about the other 67 million of us? It is about big whole numbers, so I think they should get access to those things. And again, we need to go back as a country and talk about what it is to be a parent. Because we have been very big on the parent's right to self-educate. Great news. What about the outcomes of that child? Yeah, my mum is an absolute genius. She's literally the best person that God has yet constructed, right? But she wasn't right about everything. She wasn't right. My dad, right, thought that university was an utter waste of time. After 2 years, he came and said to me, "Are you still there?" Do you see what I mean? Now, you could port that onto, should I have been in school at all? You've got to give people the ability to reverse that situation, and you've got to give us the ability and the legal rights to intervene if they're not doing the right thing.
That Philip Larkin poem is ringing in my ears.
Camilla,
right.
can I mention on
Yes.
the legal schools?
Yeah, I just want to also bring in people, so briefly, Colin, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to. I think one of the things with legal school is remove the custom base. Then the legal schools can't actually exist.
Yeah.
We have families who go away from us who pay thousands upon thousands of pounds for online tuition, which really isn't very good. But the families know they're going to get checked up on, are they delivering something for their child? So they pay for this. They'll send into legal schools because they feel they have to do that to provide adequate education. If we have another way of supporting these families, then you just remove the customer base for some of these places.
Right. Okay, questions. That man was first in the corner there. We'll bring a microphone to you. I'll come to you late in a moment.
Oh, good afternoon. Thanks to Centre for Social Justice and the panel. My name is James Dallas, and I'm a director of a company called Guide Education. We've been training teachers face-to-face and online since 2016. We've just launched a product for parents. We've repurposed the content that we use to train these teachers to make it easier for parents to have a positive influence over their children's education. Not just for parents, carers, community leaders, religious leaders, perhaps even as a pathway into an education career. My question is, what do you think the government can do to help parents? And I think the lost children of lockdown are not just the parents who are being homeschooled, but every child who's been in education. And I think I'm offering a solution, because sometimes these discussions don't come to actual solutions, but also I've got evidence, and that's one thing the government seem to talk about. My youngest sister is in year 3, and so far we have done 3 days at homeschool. I work full-time, try to support her at the same time. These videos have really helped me work with her. As a young child, she has many questions. She's not fully IT literate. She's a bright student.
Okay.
I work full-time.
Brilliant. All right, thank you for those examples. Let's bring Will and Robert in on that, because obviously the government said quite a lot about kind of catch-up lessons. I think as a parent, I've got 3 kids, and you worry, frankly. I had a boy starting secondary school in September and thought, is he actually prepared for this? Because he's basically lost out on a year. And I think that's a feeling that it's, and a fear that's reciprocated. So you've then got families who are against great adversity. It's difficult. So what can the government do, Will and Robert?
Yeah, so I think that there is lots. I mean, there's lots that we can do around catch-up, and there's an extra £3.5 billion so far going in, and there will be more to come. And James raises a really interesting point, but it's not binary. So yes, there is home education, and for some parents that will be the right thing for them, their family situation, and their children. And for others, I think the growth in these online resources and resources you can get in textbook form and others, the growth of that market is a brilliant thing, and it will enable more parents to supplement what's already happening at school, and a lot of parents will take advantage of doing that. If I could do one thing, I would just encourage more parents to read with their children and be read to. That's the one thing, if I could encourage every parent in the country to do, that's what I would do. But of course, all of these online resources, many of which are brilliant, and parents are crying out for more to help their children catch up and to progress. And I think actually, from my own experience with 2 primary age children, they're desperate for it too, and very, very hungry for more. And a lot of the stuff that's produced, and I don't know if yours is the same, is actually really, really fun. And my eldest in particular, who's 9, will sit there doing times tables, not quite realising what she's doing because she's having so much fun doing it.
Robert?
I agree with a lot of what Will has said, and I'm glad the government is putting £3 billion in catch-up. But what we've got to remember, children have lost 1 billion days of school, 1 billion. It's an average of 115 days. Children are behind in reading and maths. We know that disadvantaged pupils have learned the least. There's one survey after another that says that, and I worry that the catch-up programme isn't reaching the most disadvantaged pupils. It's reaching about 45% of the most disadvantaged, and there's regional disparities. So in the southwest, there's a massive take-up of catch-up. In the northeast, surprise, there's it's not as high. And your programme and other programmes, absolutely. But what we need to do, sometimes we put the cart before the horse. What we need to do is, given the amount of days lost for these children, I would like assessment of almost every child, especially those in exam years, to look at exactly how much lost learning there has been, how it affects them. And then you work out the catch-up programme and how you do it, and which kind of tuition, online services, whatever it may be, is the best, because we have to make sure that the product that is being offered to children is actually going to be the right one in terms of the lost learning that they have had. And that's not to say I'm not supportive of what your product, although I haven't seen it, I'm sure it's excellent, and other products, but we need to find out exactly how individual children, as well, not just in their learning, but also in their mental health, how it has affected, and then respond accordingly.
Thank you. Okay. Lady in the pattern dress, please.
It's not a dress, but
Oh, sorry, I can't see your bottom half. I do apologise.
that's okay. No, Jo Campion from the National Deaf Children's Society, and thank you to Robert for raising the issue of children with SEND. We have actually heard from a lot of our membership throughout the pandemic. Deaf children have obviously had a really difficult time with the combination of face masks in schools and also inaccessible online learning, remote learning, sometimes without subtitles or translation. When we've been doing these surveys, we've been asking about home education and any that didn't return to school. We haven't got vast numbers that have done that, but we have got experiences from some, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. Mostly, we had some families who basically said that home education, because they didn't have the noisy classroom, because they weren't getting the specialist support that they needed in their mainstream school, they actually found that where they could give their child more one-to-one and use Oak National resources, which are subtitled and do have translation, that they were actually getting a lot out of it. So some of those children, small numbers, will be actually doing better in home education than others. However, we did hear from other families whose reason for being at home was because the children were just having such a terrible time at school, and it was much more negative. It wasn't about there being something positive for them to do at home instead. It was about them having a terrible time in school. So I think this needs to be addressed in the SEND review. We really need to make sure that those children are getting the support that they need in mainstream. We've also heard from children who have been off-rolled, and that was without the parents' consent. During lockdown, the child was at home. This is one particular experience. And they tried to return to school, and the school said, "Oh, we've given your place away," and this was done without the parent even knowing. So. On the data, I would be really grateful if we could just make sure that we get that data by special educational need, with primary need, and let's find out more about what those children are getting at home. Could they still get the specialist support that they should be getting in school at home if they need it?
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go to the... it's not... You're making a great point there, which I think everyone's noted. It wasn't exactly a question, so I'm going to move on to the lady behind, just in the purple jumper there. Sorry, at the back.
Hi, Teresa Murray. I run an abuse organisation across the country, but I'm going to talk about a personal issue. So in March 2016, I off-rolled my son. I had no choice. He wanted to end his life. He was autistic because SEND is absolutely disgraceful in the schools. They are treated like they are nothing and worthless. My son was in top sets, and because of his anxiety, he shut down and he shut down and he shut down. So they dropped him and dropped him and dropped him, and he was getting bullied as well. And it took 9 months later for a police officer to help me and get him into... Oh, God, I'm going to get upset. Get him into a supported school. He then went into mainstream college, and in the 3 years he got a BTEC and his English and maths, and on Friday he passed out of the Navy. So I had to give up work. I lost a lot of money and all of my savings because I always paid out, right from when he's been 5, to have an education because I've been paying tutors. I am literally not the only parent in the country. There are children coming out, and because I run an abuse organisation, I know what's going on with some of these children. Across the country, we are failing children and we are blaming parents. And I've had social services try and remove children because of the children are having severe anxiety because teachers have actually bullied them.
Yeah.
And they don't want to go into school. So what we have to do is not keep painting the picture. And I appreciate that you have a belief that parents are there to help. But honestly and truly, it is the hardest thing to try and help your child at home. But when you have to give up everything to make sure they stay alive, it absolutely kills you because the people you need, and they turned up 10 months after I'd actually sorted him out. So, and they said, "Oh, we believe you've off-rolled him." And I went, "Yeah, March last year." And it was January. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I had no support and I didn't know where to go, and it was a police officer that helped me.
Well, can we conclude that he's bloody lucky to have you, and you've done an amazing job against great adversity. And it's not easy to share a story like that, so thank you. I'm sure that's experience is actually echoed a lot. You'll have experience of that, Colin. Right, let's see if there's any more questions, please. Olivia.
Just a question, maybe it's for Colin, maybe it's for Rob. What do we know about the link between off-rolling and subsequent radicalisation?
Interesting. Shaun, have you got an answer on that?
I'll tell you two things. I grew up in the community where the 7/7 bombers came from and all the rest of that. One of the most prominent things in our community was a school. Well, there were 2 schools. One was clearly illegal. One was community education support, and actually was probably a good thing. I am not so focused on the group of parents who can probably make this work. They, for me, are a different set of people. I am focused on the communities and the parents that if their children are not in school, what they lose as well as their formal education is our collective ability to support them, to see if they're being abused, to keep them away from crime. And in my particular community in West London, a great deal of the boys who turned out to be involved in some very, very heavyweight stuff, a universal factor was they weren't in school. So what it meant was they meant the supervision. I'm actually one of they missed the supervision. I'm one of the people who think we ask teachers to do a little bit too much. We ask them to be nurses, teachers, social workers, police officers. I think we ask them to do too much. But what a school does provide very, very excellently is a very safe space. Teachers are brilliant at providing that space, and if people are off-rolled, they miss that. But I just want to say 2 things. I think Robert's idea of a Bill of Rights is spot on, because what it will do, it will bring a focus on to where people are being failed, and a parent like you would be able to point to that Bill of Rights and say, well, this is my right, could we respond to that? The other thing we need to do is change the culture around school stats. A school should not be punished if it's losing children off its role, if it can say why those children are lost its role. Running a school in the middle of Kensington and Chelsea is very different to one who ran in Scunthorpe, and I think that should be reflected in the facts. I happen to be a school governor, and I remember another school governor saying to me, we should also be measured, or what should be at the top of the measurement is the journey travelled for a child, not just the raw hard statistics, how many do we get 5 ACG, and that is the problem. Schools are responding to the environment they're in, and the government can change that environment.
I'm looking at the clock and thinking it's ticking away. 2 more questions. That lady there, please.
Hi there, Fiona Cuthbertson, Keystone Consulting. Just coming back to that point, actually, would it be worth looking at the Ofsted framework? Because at the moment, schools are judged very much on the grades that they provide, not about everything else that could be wrapped around that, and as you say, the journey for those children who are not going to achieve those grades.
Alice, I mean, your recommendations are close to more accountability, obviously. What role does Ofsted have to play in this?
So that's a really good question. In fact, CSJ was very interested in looking at the role of Ofsted, but they have recently changed their framework in 2019, and we've not yet seen the repercussions of that. So their framework was changed to focus more on the pupils that you've got, where have you taken them to from where you started. The truth is, we really don't know how that framework has rolled out, because it's been massively disrupted throughout the pandemic. I will, however, echo that we do need more accountability, just generally around pupil movement. I mean, it was great to hear about the idea of having more data on whether or not a child moves overall. I know loads of local authorities who are talking about, oh yeah, we have now 0 exclusions, you know, we're really inclusive, lots of our kids stay in school, and that's just not the case, because when you dig a little bit deeper, you can see that pupils are coming off roll, but just not through school exclusions. There's no formal way of capturing this. I think there's quite a lot that we could do with the existing data out there, and the DfE has actually made steps towards collecting better data on pupil movement, which is brilliant. I think it's the first step to proper accountability around this issue, and hopefully the Ofsted framework will see how effective the changes have been there.
Thank you. Final question. I think that lady wanted one with the pink glasses.
Thank you. I'm Hilary Scott from Canterbury, and I've been volunteering this summer with Invicta National Academy. And just coming back to the lady at the back, I'd just like to say a little couple of words about James, who's been in Key Stage 3. He's bounced from one school to another, and last year in the summer, he was at his latest school, and in the summer holidays he came across Invicta National Academy, and he signed up for lessons. People didn't think that James was very bright. He wasn't very engaged in learning, but his mother sat him down at the computer, and it turned out that actually James was extremely bright, and he's been operating at GCSE level. He's done Invicta National Academy lessons every summer. They've been provided every summer. Every holidays, I beg your pardon, throughout the last 12 months. And I saw a video of James this week, standing at the front of the class, teaching the other children. James had been distracted by other children. He was a distractor as well, and actually he's now found his niche. Okay. There are lots of stories like this with Invicta children. And coming back to your point, Colin, Invicta is now including children. Children are coming back into the classroom if they've been through the Invicta programme, where they feel included and they feel part of the system. Many of the children have had anxiety, and they're finding that with these online lessons that their confidence has grown and their self-belief has grown.
Right, can we have a very final word from Colin? 30 seconds that fills us with hope, please, Colin, if you can.
I think the biggest thing that I always kind of come back to is that even though I can sort of sound a little bit kind of like the school system isn't doing what it should do, I think it's full of people that really, really want it to. I think there's not a single teacher that doesn't believe in the individual and the children they've got in front of them, doesn't believe in the power of education to change. And I think we're sitting here at a time we've got the opportunity to make that change and free them and actually look at the accountability measures, look at things like, let's look at more of a learner's journey rather than just saying what are the exam results. And I think if we give that freedom to schools, then I think we'll remove a lot of the issues we're talking about.
Yeah, and in conclusion as well, let's wish Will all the best in your new role, because Minister for Children and Families, I mean, it doesn't get more important than that, does it? Thank you everybody so much for your contributions. Hope you've enjoyed this panel. Look up the CSJ online for more information. It's an amazing think tank for like-minded people like us. Thank you very, very much indeed.